Welcome to The Tiny Tackle, the official podcast of the Impossible Women. I'm your host, Miranda Wheeler, and we'll be having conversations about some of the biggest issues of our time in a way that brings all of our strengths, stakes, and learning styles to the table. For a bit of background, if you're joining us for the first time, The Impossible Women is a site dedicated to sharing stories of innovation, leadership, and excellence from extraordinary individuals from across the globe. In 2018, The Impossible Women started as a joke. It started in a small country kitchen, not so different from a Christmas in Connecticut. A woman declined her husband's help while carrying something heavy. He threw up his hands and grumbled, "You're impossible." And she said, "I think you mean incredible." That charming exchange belonged to my parents. Most women have heard the comment, and at some point, every single person hears a joke or sees a meme about women being notoriously difficult, complicated, stubborn, or otherwise Taurian. But really, it's those qualities that have women and girls out there doing the unexpected, the incredible, and pushing the limits of what's impossible. That should be the image that comes to mind. That's the story we want to tell, and that's the sound we want to amplify. Each week, The Impossible Women looks at a major global contemporary issue and the women who are tackling it head on. And before we let you go, we round out with something you didn't know, and our tiny tackle, a way to call to action. Something so small and profound and profoundly awesome that you face your week with a totally doable way to make the world a better place. Welcome to The Impossible Women. In today's episode, we're talking about Supreme Court justices, the right to vote, women's suffrage, and where we're going next in a variety of industries. This is the future of American women. For many, this is an incredibly sad week to start a podcast on great women. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away after a long battle with cancer on September 18th, 2020 at the age of 87. But she is still making history. As of the 27th, the notorious RBG, the second of only 4 female justices to ever be confirmed to the Supreme Court, is the first woman and the first Jewish person to lie in state, an exclusive honor reserved for public figures of national importance. What's more profound for many of us who admired her is the life that she led as an American lawyer, jurist, and associate justice on the United States Supreme Court, a position that she held from her 1993 appointment by then-President Bill Clinton until 2020, at the time of her death. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was born in Brooklyn in 1933, 60 years prior to her court appointment. She earned her bachelor's at Cornell before going on to Harvard Law and eventually teaching at Rutgers and Columbia Law Schools. In both schools, she was at the top of her class, and one of just a handful of American women to teach civil procedure at the college level at the time. Ruth Bader Ginsburg wasn't just notoriously awesome. She was a notorious champion of women. No other public figure in American history has ever stood so resolutely for women's issues. With a lifetime spent advocating for the advancement of women, the pursuit of gender parity, and winning a plethora of tense cases for women's rights at the highest court of the nation, proponents of everything from equal pay to anti-discrimination to reproductive health rights have RBG to thank for the latest 27 years of progress. Of her own legacy, she simply and beautifully said, "I would just like people to think of me as a judge who did the best she could with whatever limited talent I had to keep our country true to what makes it a great nation, and to make things a little better than they might have been if I hadn't been there." Statisticians and economists are saying that women will not achieve economic parity until 2050, and that we might be looking at 2100 for gender equality in less direct economic terms. Still, women are doing the impossible. They're defying the odds in a world where equal participation, equal success, and equal recognition are unheard of. Women are breaking records and making history to be the first to do a number of things. In just a small pocket of wisdom from Nelson Mandela, everything is impossible until it's done. We are consistently seeing headlines, and the good news reminds us exactly where we're headed. The first all-woman-led mission to Mars has been recently assembled by NASA. 2 teenage females from South Africa who didn't get the engineering education they wanted in class went outside of class to hand build and fly a plane from Cape Town, South Africa to Cairo, Egypt. But why is all of this so unthinkable? We see incredible women in history whose accomplishments were silenced, buried, or otherwise under-recognized and even attributed to someone else. There are precedents, even if we don't obviously see one. The reality is that even the most amazing people who are doing something that's never been done before can face imposter syndrome because they're doing something that's never been done before. One of the ways to circumvent this experience is by going to the roots of many fields and establishing that there is always a precedent, and nothing is really impossible. Politically, we might look at Frances Perkins, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and in countries like New Zealand or Iceland, prime ministers, making something very possible even without a modern presidential precedent in the States. On women in STEM, we can look at Marie Curie, the true story of hidden figures, and the code girls of World War II. In the arts, Artemisia was attributed away to her father, while Mary Shelley was ignored despite having invented an entire genre as a teenager. In STEAM, we can look at incredible women like Hedy Lamarr. For women in aviation, do we need to look farther than Amelia Earhart? And for women in representation, the work of Maya Deren to Greta Gerwig to Sofia Coppola to a story of someone like Jane Fonda and Natalie Portman, and Olivia Wilde, who pushed from on-screen to behind the screen to a powerful and untraditional career in directing. Reese Witherspoon recently started her own production company, and Meryl Streep recently started an incubator for female filmmakers over 50 after being told she was aging out, despite being one of the greatest actresses of our time. And finally, there are a series of record-breaking firsts in Congress happening every single election year. There have been strong women on this journey in these industries for some time. And if we're looking at what to expect ahead and for a little optimism, all we need is one call to action from the great Rosa Parks. Knowing what must be done does away with fear. Civil fairness, constitutional leadership, and equality are all facing a difficult time nationally, even as we work harder than ever to be taken seriously with a seat at the table. Ruth Bader Ginsburg famously postponed her retirement well into a devastating battle with cancer to prevent encroachment on the rights she invested her life to protect. No matter your stance or political affiliations, we can all agree that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was a strong proponent of the U.S. Constitution and honored a preamble-like vision of inclusion and liberty, justice, and freedom for all world. So for your tiny tackle, what can you do in her honor? You don't have to be a Supreme Court justice to have an impact. Start by taking a few minutes at lunch, grab a phone or a computer and check out rockthevote.org or whenweallvote.org. These nonpartisan resources can help you check up on your registration, register to vote, request an absentee ballot, or find voting and polling information about how you can participate in the 2020 election on November 3rd. In spite of the amazing work of women like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, we have a long way to go. 2020 marks only the first centennial of the 1920 19th Amendment that granted women the right to vote, and African American women were only granted the right nationally in 1965. Roe v. Wade, a national critical landmark case for basic biological autonomy, is still being contested in state courts, despite the case already being settled as a constitutional precedent for biological autonomy and human rights in 1973. It is not universally implemented, and regional governments fight to undermine those federal protections. It is also considered controversial in the United States for women to have medical decisions made with their doctors and not regulated, like commodities, by male politicians and legislatures with no boundaries between sexism and state, often cited as unconstitutionally imposed religious beliefs. And although Ruth Bader Ginsburg nominated successor is also a woman, her values, beliefs, and life's work could not be more oppositional to the values that Ruth stood for. Likewise, women only make an average of 75 cents on every single dollar that men make for the exact same work. And for some racial and ethnic identities, that figure is much lower. The opportunity gap is wide and troubling, and some fields are extremely difficult for women to enter despite demand being higher than ever and women being half the population. The good news is that there are a lot of people who are trying to make a difference, who see these issues and are raising their own personal commitment to changing the world. One of the most obvious ways that we can see this is looking at the leadership that's coming out of the entertainment industry, which is one of the most infamously male-dominated industries in America. BAFTA, which is based out of the UK, recently unveiled a series of diversity requirements and future nominations that insist that half the representation of directors, producers, and other people in power who are awarded honors for the work that they do in the film industry have to be women. Or at least efforts need to be made to make sure that a pool is collected that allow people to be able to be considered for those awards, and also that there is every intention and effort made for a certain amount of women to be included. This exact same concept was just brought in at ABC, which is now requiring representation for their directors, producers, and also new shows being brought into their lineup. The Gina Davis Institute for Gender and Media regularly produces parity statistics on how many women are speaking on film compared to men, what the future of speaking roles are, and what women are doing behind the scenes and on screen, how women are represented, and also how different entertainment companies are empowering women into roles of creative influence. It's extremely important for women to be able to see themselves in these jobs that they do not have role models to follow, because it is extremely difficult to do things that have no precedent. It would be unfair and untrue to claim that women don't have major systemic barriers and massive world issues to overcome if we are going to achieve gender parity, not just nationwide, but worldwide. And to make matters worse, some of the other issues that are most critical but most neglected by world leaders and representatives consistently disproportionately affect women and girls, like education, healthcare, intersectional environmentalism, food and water scarcity, violence, disease, agriculture, and extreme poverty. But there are also increasingly visible feminist female leaders, not just in activistic movements or literature, but in politics and positions of congressional power, like Congresswomen Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Ilhan Omar and Elizabeth Warren, female vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris, Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, Mayor of San Juan Carmen Yulín Cruz, and last year some of the most seriously considered public figure women candidates on stage running for president in American history. So there are opportunities for women to follow in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's footsteps. Our final quote of the day comes from Malala Yousafzai: "When the world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful." This week, we want to ask our listeners, who's inspiring you? How are you getting out there? Share your favorite story from history, the news, or your life, and tell us your voting plan. Write to us at impossiblepodcastinfo@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Impossible Women or at Miranda E. Wheeler. Thanks for tuning in. Grab your coffee and your kindness and let's go conquer Monday. Hey there, I see you. Get up here, kid. What do you think you're doing? Hiding under the bed at our new country's birthday party? Pretending you can zone out of a meaningful conversation? Unacceptable. Well, I'm glad you're here. America is a sprightly and moody teenager at just 243 years old, and she's having a rough time coming of age. There's a long way to go, and lots of vulnerable populations are still being carded. 2020 is the centennial anniversary of women's suffrage, and African Americans did not have that right federally until Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law. The nation is at a vulnerable time for some of the most important issues of our time. But you can step up. Nothing says hustle like getting out there with personal agency, feeling informed and empowered to make your best decisions, and having a say in your future. We have got this, November. This episode of The Impossible Women has been brought to you by the American Democratic Republic. Rates and restrictions apply. Not valid in 50 of 50 states for all people. Only applicable to women since 1920. See the 19th Amendment for details.